They screamed at each other over gold chains, they threw customers out onto 8 Mile Road, and for 9 seasons they turned a Detroit pawn shop into one of the most watched shows on cable television. True TV's Hardcore Pawn ran from 2010 to 2015, built entirely around the daily grind of American Jewelry and Loan, a family-owned pawn shop that had been operating in Detroit decades before a single camera ever showed up. Viewers tuned in for the shouting matches and the wild items people tried to sell, but underneath the drama was a real business run by real people, and when the cameras finally stopped rolling in 2015, those people didn't vanish, they just went back to actual lives that the show never had time to show. Some stayed exactly where you'd expect. Others built entirely new careers far outside of Detroit. And at least one family member walked straight into a headline nobody saw coming, just a few months before this video was made. This is where the real cast of Hardcore Pawn actually ended up, based on their own public statements, verified news reporting, and court records where they exist. Les Gold, the man who never left. If there is one person from Hardcore Pawn who genuinely never went anywhere, it's Les Gold. He is still the owner of American Jewelry and Loan, still showing up to work at the flagship store on 8 Mile Road, and still the face people picture when they think about pawnbroking in Detroit. Les is a third-generation pawnbroker whose own grandfather ran a shop on Michigan Avenue, and he opened the first version of American Jewelry and Loan back in 1978, long before reality television ever found him. After the show ended, Les didn't fade into retirement the way a lot of reality stars do once the cameras leave. He picked up guest spots, including an appearance on Food Network's Chopped, and kept talking publicly about pawnshops as a kind of economic barometer for ordinary working people. In interviews as recent as 2024, he described watching customers shift from occasional pawns to desperate, weekly visits for gas money and groceries, calling pawnbrokers street-level economists who see economic stress up close before it ever shows up in official reports. Rather than winding the business down, Les expanded it. American Jewelry and Loan now operates multiple locations across Wayne and Oakland counties, including newer stores in Southgate and Lincoln Park that opened years after the show wrapped, alongside the original flagship location that's grown into a showroom and storage facility covering more than 50,000 square feet. He has openly said he isn't interested in retiring and has left the door open to bringing some version of the show back if the opportunity ever arose. Today, in his late 70s, Les Gold is still walking the same showroom floor that made him famous, and the family business reportedly employs somewhere around 200 people across its locations. Seth Gold, the son who modernized the business. While Les became the face of the brand, his son Seth quietly became the person modernizing it. Seth is now the vice president of American Jewelry and Loan, and in the years since the show ended he's focused heavily on dragging a very old-school industry into the digital age. In 2019, Seth partnered with PawnMate Incorporated to launch Fast Pawn, an online payment tool that lets customers renew loans or make layaway payments without ever setting foot in the store. He was also central to the company's physical growth, helping oversee the openings in Southgate and Lincoln Park. Beyond the pawn business, Seth co-hosts a podcast with his father called the Gold Tone Podcast, where the two of them interview guests from sports, business, and entertainment. He and Les have also put real money behind local causes, including a $10,000 contribution toward microloans for Detroit high schoolers trying to start their own small businesses. Seth has kept his personal relationships almost entirely out of the public eye, but professionally, he's about as visible in Detroit business circles today as he ever was on television. Ashley Gold, the jewelry designer caught in her husband's headlines. Ashley Gold, known on the show by her married name Ashley Broad, ran the jewelry department at American Jewelry and Loan before walking away from the family business in the show's final season, reportedly over friction with a cousin who'd been promoted above her. She didn't disappear, though. In 2015, she launched her own online jewelry brand, first called Pawn Chick Shopping and later rebranded as ashleygold.com, where she designs and sells handmade stainless steel and sterling silver pieces, including a line of permanent, welded-on jewelry. She also hosts a radio show, Pawn Chick Radio, focused mostly on fashion, and runs a social media consulting firm on the side. She's spoken publicly about a 35-pound weight loss she achieved through diet and exercise, and by most accounts she has stayed close with her family despite going independent. But Ashley's name reappeared in Detroit news for a very different reason in early 2026. Her husband, Jordan Broad, was federally charged with wire fraud after prosecutors alleged he funneled several $1 million from his former employer into accounts and companies connected to himself and to Ashley, including her jewelry business, over the course of roughly a year. According to reporting from the Detroit News and Click on Detroit, Ashley herself has not been charged in the case and was named only in connection with where some of the funds allegedly landed. Broad was released after posting bond, and the case was still working through the courts as of this year. It's a genuinely difficult headline for the family, and worth stating clearly, the allegations are against her husband, not her. Big Joe, the guard who got caught on camera. Of everyone connected to hardcore pawn, Joel Shannon, known to fans as Big Joe, had maybe the most dramatic on-screen fall of the entire series. As head of security, Big Joe spent years as one of the show's most trusted figures, the guy who kept the chaos of the shop floor under control. Then, in a storyline that actually aired, he was caught stealing scrap gold from the store he'd been hired to protect, and he was arrested and fired as a direct result. It was a genuinely rough way for a fan favorite to exit a show. But Big Joe's life afterward wasn't the story of collapse that a moment like that might suggest. He rebuilt, moving into the logistics world and eventually founding his own trucking and transportation company, High Gear Transportation, based in Livonia, Michigan, a business built around freight hauling rather than anything connected to jewelry, gold, or pawnbroking. Social media posts in the years since show him running the business and spending time with his wife, Felice, and their children, and he's kept enough of a presence online that fans of the show still occasionally recognize him and reach out. It's not the kind of redemption arc that made headlines the way his firing once did, since nobody was filming the years it took to rebuild a career and a reputation. But by the available public record, he genuinely landed on his feet. Rich Pyle, from pawn shop manager to cornhole host. Rich Pyle ran the day-to-day operations of American Jewelry and Loan as store manager for 25 years before the relationship with Les Gold broke down and he left the company, reportedly after a dispute that an apology couldn't fully repair. What happened next for Rich is honestly one of the more unusual second acts to come out of the show. He briefly turned up hosting National Geographic's Meltdown, then launched his own clothing line, RPM Gear, with a business partner. From there, Pyle found his footing in a corner of sports media nobody would have predicted. He's now the host and executive producer of Whole Nation, a show built around competitive cornhole. Outside of that, he plays drums in a Detroit-based band called Daniel Harrison and the $2 Highway, and he remains a fairly visible figure in Motown's local music and sports scenes, even if he's kept his personal relationships out of interviews. Felix Teichmann, the bearded guard who simply left. Fielding Teichmann, known to viewers as Felix, was one of the show's most recognizable security guards, largely thanks to a beard that made him instantly identifiable even in a crowded shop floor. He was part of the cast through the show's 6th season, and true to how the show operated, his departure was never actually explained on screen. He was simply there one season and gone the next. According to public records and his own limited social media presence, Felix relocated to Austin, Texas in 2016, and has kept an extremely low profile since. There's no dramatic story of scandal or hardship attached to his exit that's been publicly documented. He appears to have just chosen a quieter life away from Detroit and away from cameras. Bobby Janek, the employee who became an online personality. Bobby Janek worked around the shop in the show's later seasons without ever becoming one of its central figures, but his life after Hardcore Pawn turned out to be one of the more active among the supporting cast. He reportedly left the store in 2016 and popped up afterward on the car-focused reality series Wrench Wars. For several years he served as the spokesperson for Bars Products, a Michigan-based motor vehicle products company, before shifting into freelance work as a voiceover artist. These days Janek has built an online following as a streamer and content creator, active on TikTok and Twitch, where he plays and reacts to video games for an audience that mostly has no idea he ever worked a pawn shop counter on cable television. He also runs a merchandise store selling branded mugs, hoodies, and apparel to that newer fan base. He's talked publicly about being close with his grandfather, but like several others from the show, he keeps most of his personal life, including his relationships, largely private, choosing to let his online persona rather than his reality TV past define how people know him now. Carneal Hook Steiger, the prankster who stayed local. Carneal Steiger, better known by his nickname Hook, was part of the security team known for pulling pranks on customers and occasionally getting formally warned for it. He appeared on the show through part of its 8th season before exiting. Unlike some of his former co-workers, Hook doesn't appear to maintain any real public or social media presence, and detailed information about his life after the show is limited. What public reporting does suggest is that he stayed in the Detroit area, living well outside the spotlight that once followed him around a pawn shop floor. Darren McCarty, the Stanley Cup champion who found sobriety. Before he ever set foot in American Jewelry and Loan, Darren McCarty was already a Detroit legend, a four-time Stanley Cup champion with the Red Wings, and one of the most beloved enforcers the franchise ever had. By the time he joined the pawn shop staff in 2011, though, he was dealing with the aftermath of a difficult decade, a 2005 bankruptcy, well-documented struggles with alcohol, and the kind of public scrutiny that comes with falling from a Stanley Cup podium to a sales counter on 8 Mile Road. Seth Gold has said publicly that McCarty came into the shop initially just to look around, got interested in the business, and asked to learn the trade from the ground up. His stint at the store was relatively brief in the show's run, but it became one of its more talked-about storylines specifically because viewers were watching a genuine hometown hero navigate a very public struggle. What happened after is the part of his story that actually matters most. McCarty has spoken openly and repeatedly, in outlets like Fox 17 and the Detroit Free Press, about hitting a breaking point around November of 2015, when he says he was roughly 70 pounds heavier than his playing weight and in serious physical danger from years of alcohol abuse. He got sober, and he stayed sober. As of his most recent public update in late 2024, McCarty had reached 9 years without alcohol or opioids, a milestone he announced himself online to an outpouring of support from Red Wings fans. He now works as a broadcaster and commentator for the Woodward Sports Network, covering Detroit and Michigan sports, hosts a radio program, and speaks openly about addiction recovery, describing his current focus as helping other people who are going through what he went through. Of everyone connected to hardcore pawn, McCarty's story is probably the clearest example of someone who hit real rock bottom on camera and then did the actual work to climb back out of it, off camera, over years. What's left of hardcore pawn today? Hardcore Pawn ran on True TV from 2010 to 2015, across 9 seasons and over 160 episodes, and it's easy to forget just how big it actually was at its peak, drawing a fan base that stretched well beyond the United States into Europe and Africa. The show also spun off a short-lived Chicago version, and it turned a working-class pawn shop on 8 Mile Road into one of the most recognizable settings on cable television, right alongside competitors like Pawn Stars in Las Vegas. More than a decade after it went off the air, the flagship shop is still open, still run day-to-day by the Gold family, and still occasionally visited by fans who show up half expecting to see a camera crew in the corner. What the show never told you, because it couldn't, is what happened after the credits stopped rolling for good. A father who never really stopped working and openly says retirement isn't on his mind. A son who took the family trade digital, building an online payment system that didn't exist when the show first aired. A daughter who built a jewelry brand entirely her own, even as a fraud case involving her husband put the family name back in Detroit headlines this year, for reasons that had nothing to do with anything she was accused of. Security guards who scattered into trucking companies, cornhole broadcasts, streaming platforms, and quiet lives in new cities far from Detroit. And one Stanley Cup champion who used a very public low point on that shop floor as the beginning of one of the more genuine recovery stories to ever come out of reality television, one he's still talking about honestly, years later, to anyone who might need to hear it. Not every ending here was neat, and a couple of these stories, particularly Ashley's, are still actively developing in the courts. But nobody on this list vanished the way clickbait headlines like to claim they did, and the actual, documented record of their lives after the show is honestly more interesting, and a lot more human, than any fabricated story could be. If you want more honest, sourced deep dives into what actually happened to the casts of your favorite reality shows, let me know in the comments which one to cover next.